"Stop, I'll pay," shouted the rancher upon seeing the Apache woman who once saved his life. John Whitman had always been a man of the land. The Arizona desert was his home, and he had learned to respect its harshness and beauty from the moment he could walk. The endless stretches of dry, dusty earth, the sharp scent of sagebrush, and the heat of the sun beating down on his back were part of his life. He worked hard every day, tending to his cattle, fixing fences, and making sure his small ranch ran smoothly. It was not an easy life, but John liked the freedom it gave him. No one told him what to do, and the vast, open land made him feel alive. One summer, the heat was worse than usual. The sun blazed in the sky, and the ground was cracked and dry. John's cattle were restless, and the creeks and wells had little water. He had been riding all morning to check on his herd, leading them to a patch of grass that had survived the heat. As he guided the cows through a narrow canyon, he felt a sense of calm. The desert could be cruel, but it could also feel like a friend sometimes. That calm, however, did not last long. Suddenly, a group of men appeared from behind the rocks. Their faces were rough and tired, but their eyes were sharp and dangerous. John realized immediately that they were not neighbors or travelers. They were bandits. They wanted his cattle, his supplies, or perhaps something worse. John tried to steer his horse back the way he had come, but the men had blocked his path. One of them shouted for him to stop, but John shook his head and tried to ride past. The leader of the group, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, raised a gun. John knew then that running would not save him. In a moment of panic, John's horse stumbled on the rocky ground. He was thrown violently to the earth, hitting his side on a sharp rock. Pain shot through him, and he felt his strength leaving him. The bandits laughed and approached, thinking he was easy prey. John tried to reach for his gun, but his hands shook and his vision blurred. He could barely move. Fear and desperation filled him. It seemed certain that he would not survive this attack. Just as the bandits were about to take him, a sudden sound split the air. A sharp whistle, almost like the cry of a hawk, echoed through the canyon. From the rocks above, a figure appeared, slim, swift, and silent. It was a young Apache woman, moving with incredible speed and grace. She carried a bow, and her arrows flew with deadly accuracy. One by one, the bandits fell back, startled and afraid. The leader tried to rally them, but she moved too quickly, disappearing and reappearing, striking in ways that seemed impossible. John, still on the ground, watched in disbelief. He had heard stories of Apache warriors, but he had never seen one in action. The woman fought not recklessly, but with careful precision. She was calm and focused, as if she could predict every move the men would make. In a matter of moments, the bandits realized they were beaten. They fled, leaving John alone in the canyon. When the dust settled, the Apache woman approached him. John struggled to sit up, feeling weak and dizzy. She knelt beside him, examining his injuries. His side was cut and bruised, and his arm was swollen. She spoke softly in her language, words John could not understand, but her tone was gentle and reassuring. She took off her scarf and wrapped it around his wounds, applying pressure to stop the bleeding. Her hands were skilled and confident, showing years of experience. John tried to thank her, but the words caught in his throat. He was overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. The woman smiled slightly, as if she understood his gratitude without needing words. She motioned for him to follow her, and despite his pain, he nodded. Together they moved through the canyon, her leading and him limping behind. The sun was high in the sky, and the rocks around them reflected its heat. John felt weak, but her presence gave him strength. As they walked, John noticed small details about her. Her eyes were dark and alert, always scanning their surroundings. Her movements were fluid, almost like she was part of the desert itself. Her hair, long and black, was tied back neatly. There was a quiet confidence in the way she carried herself. John realized that she was not just a warrior, but someone deeply connected to the land. After some time, they reached a small cave hidden behind a cluster of rocks. Inside, it was cool and shaded, a welcome relief from the harsh sun. The Apache woman made him lie down on a bed of soft grasses and continued to tend his wounds. She cleaned the cuts carefully, using water from a small clay container she carried. John winced but did not complain. He felt a strange sense of peace, as if he were safe for the first time since the attack began. While she worked, John tried to communicate. He spoke slowly, pointing to his side, trying to say thank you. She nodded, understanding him without words. Over the next few hours, he watched her move around the cave, gathering herbs and preparing a simple meal. She offered him food, which he accepted gratefully, though he had little appetite. The water she provided cooled his throat, and he drank it eagerly. Throughout this time, John learned more about her in small ways. He noticed the patterns of her movements, the way she listened to the wind and the sounds of the desert. He realized that she knew the land in a way he never could. Every step she took seemed purposeful, as if she were part of a story written by the desert itself. He felt admiration growing in his heart, not just for her skill, but for her connection to the world around her. As the evening came, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the canyon. The sky turned pink and gold, and the air cooled. John felt exhaustion take over. He realized how close he had come to death, and how this woman had saved him without asking for anything in return. He wanted to repay her, to offer some gesture of gratitude, but he did not know how. He simply lay there, silent, watching her move around, feeling a mix of awe, relief, and curiosity. That night, as John tried to sleep on the soft grasses, he thought about the events of the day. He had come to the desert expecting a routine check on his cattle, and he had found himself on the brink of death. But instead of meeting his end, he had met someone extraordinary, a woman who had the courage, skill, and heart to save a stranger's life. He realized that this encounter was more than just luck. It was a turning point, a moment that would change the way he saw the world and himself. The Apache woman kept watch through the night, her eyes scanning the horizon. John felt safe under her watchful gaze. For the first time in his life, he understood the meaning of trust and selflessness. He fell asleep thinking of her bravery and wondering about the life she led in the desert. He knew that he would never forget this day, or the woman who had saved him from certain death. By the time morning came, John felt stronger. His wounds still hurt, but he had survived. He wanted to speak, to offer thanks, to somehow repay her, but she shook her head gently, telling him with gestures that he needed only to rest. In that quiet moment, John understood that gratitude was not always about words or gifts. Sometimes, it was about respect, understanding, and carrying the memory of kindness in one's heart. As they left the cave together, John limped along while she guided him. He realized that this was just the beginning of a journey, not only through the desert but through a new understanding of life, courage, and humanity. The bond formed in those tense hours would stay with him forever, shaping the man he was and the man he would become. Even though he did not know her name, John felt a deep connection to the Apache woman. She had saved his life without hesitation, without expectation, and without fear. And in that act of bravery, John learned a lesson he would never forget. Sometimes, the most extraordinary people come into our lives at the most unexpected moments, changing us forever. After the day John Whitman had survived, life on the ranch seemed both familiar and strangely different. The sun rose as usual over the desert. The cattle still wandered the dry pastures, and the wind whispered through the sagebrush. Yet, John's mind was filled with thoughts of the Apache woman who had saved him. Her bravery and skill had left a lasting impression on him, and he could not shake the feeling that he owed her more than words could ever express. Days passed, but John found himself thinking about her constantly. He tried to go about his work as usual, checking fences, feeding the animals, and mending broken gates, but his mind kept drifting back to that narrow canyon. He remembered the way she had moved, quiet and precise, almost as if she were part of the land itself. Her dark eyes, always alert, seemed to hold a secret wisdom that he did not understand. John realized he wanted to find her again, not only to thank her but to understand the courage and life that had shaped her. However, finding her was not simple. The Apache people lived in the vast desert, moving with the seasons and the needs of their community. There were no maps to guide him, no clear paths to follow. John asked around the nearby settlements, describing the woman as best as he could, but most had never seen her. Some doubted she even existed, thinking he might have imagined her in the heat and stress of that day. Yet John knew the truth. He could not forget her, no matter how much he tried. In the meantime, John tried to focus on what he could control. He repaired fences damaged by storms, led his cattle to new grazing grounds, and made sure there was water in every trough. But even as he worked, he felt restless. Every shadow in the canyon reminded him of that day. Every sound of wind through the rocks brought back the memory of her arrows and the calm way she had protected him. The memory was not frightening anymore. Instead, it carried a sense of awe and gratitude. John also began to think about the larger world beyond his ranch. He had lived most of his life focused on the land and his cattle, but meeting her had opened his eyes to a different way of life. He started to notice the patterns of nature more closely, the way animals moved, the changes in the weather, and the signs the desert gave. He remembered how she had seemed to know everything without needing to ask, how she had anticipated danger and acted swiftly. John realized that her connection to the land was unlike anything he had experienced. One afternoon, while walking along a narrow trail near the edge of his property, John noticed signs of movement, footprints in the sand, the faint sound of someone humming, and the smell of smoke from a distant fire. His heart raced, thinking for a moment that it might be her. But as he followed the signs, he saw only small animals and the occasional traveler passing through. Yet the feeling stayed with him. She was out there somewhere, moving through the desert with the same confidence and skill he had seen. John's thoughts of her were not only about curiosity or gratitude, they became something deeper. He began to understand that the desert was not just a harsh, empty place. It was full of life, full of people with stories, traditions, and wisdom. He remembered the way she had looked at him while tending his wounds, how she had spoken in her own language with a gentle tone, and how she had guided him without hesitation. Her actions were simple, yet they carried a powerful message about courage, compassion, and selflessness. In his quiet moments, John began to write in a small notebook he kept in his jacket. He wrote about that day, about the fear he had felt, the pain of his injuries, and the relief of being saved. But most of all, he wrote about her, the way she moved, the strength in her arms, and the kindness in her eyes. Writing helped him process his thoughts and reminded him that his gratitude was not fleeting. It was something he wanted to honor every day. As weeks turned into months, John noticed small changes in himself. He became more patient with his cattle, more observant of the land, and more respectful of the people who lived nearby. He started listening to their stories and learning about their lives. Some neighbors were settlers, others traders or wanderers, but each had lessons to share. John realized that just as the Apache woman had taught him courage and trust, he could learn from the experiences of others. Despite these changes, John could not stop thinking about finding her. One evening, he made a plan. He would travel to the edges of Apache territory, where traders and travelers often passed. He prepared carefully, packing supplies, water, and tools for survival. He knew he might not find her, and he accepted that possibility, but the journey itself seemed important. It was not just about repaying a debt. It was about understanding, about connecting with someone who had touched his life in a profound way. Before leaving, John spoke with his neighbors. He asked questions about the terrain, the weather, and the people who lived in the desert. Some warned him that it would be dangerous, that the desert could be unforgiving to anyone who ventured without knowledge. Others encouraged him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. John listened to every piece of advice, knowing that preparation and respect for the land were essential. He packed carefully, checking his gear and supplies multiple times, determined not to let carelessness jeopardize his journey. On the first day of his journey, John felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The sun rose over the desert, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. The air was crisp, and the wind carried the scent of sage and dry earth. As he rode, he remembered the woman's face, her steady hands, and her quiet confidence. He knew that finding her would not be easy, but the thought of seeing her again, of speaking to her and showing his gratitude, gave him courage. He traveled for days, navigating rocky paths, crossing dry creek beds, and following trails left by travelers and animals. Sometimes he saw signs of life, small camps, smoke from distant fires, or footprints in the sand, but none led him directly to her. The desert was vast and often lonely, but John felt a strange sense of connection, as if her presence was guiding him even when he could not see her. He remembered the way she had saved him, and realized that acts of kindness could leave invisible trails, leading people even long after the moment had passed. During this journey, John also encountered people who told stories of the Apache, of their courage, traditions, and deep connection to the land. He listened carefully, absorbing every detail. These stories made him respect their way of life even more. He began to understand that her bravery was not only a personal trait, but part of a larger tradition of resilience, respect, and community. John realized that he was learning not just about her, but about a world that was different from his own, a world of knowledge, skill, and values that had been shaped by generations. After weeks of travel, John returned to his ranch, tired but determined. Though he had not found her yet, the journey had changed him. He had learned patience, respect for the desert, and a deeper appreciation for the lives of people he had once only seen from a distance. More than anything, he had learned that gratitude was not just a word or a gift. It was a commitment to remember, honor, and carry forward the lessons he had received. Back at the ranch, life continued as before, but John felt a quiet hope. He knew that one day, paths would cross again. The Apache woman who had saved his life was out there somewhere, and when they met again, he wanted to be ready, not just to thank her, but to show that he had grown, that he understood, and that her courage had inspired him in ways he could never forget. Even in moments of solitude, while repairing fences or tending to cattle, John's thoughts returned to her. He imagined her moving through the desert, skilled, brave, and free. He imagined the lessons she could teach, the stories she could share, and the bond that had already begun to form between them. And in his heart, John knew that this was not the end of their story, but only the beginning. Through it all, one truth remained clear. The Apache woman had changed him forever. She had shown him the power of courage, the strength of kindness, and the importance of respect. John realized that no matter how long it took to find her again, the lessons she had given him would stay with him for the rest of his life. He would honor her by living with honesty, compassion, and an open heart, knowing that true gratitude is reflected not only in words, but in the life we choose to lead. Months had passed since John Whitman had returned from his journey into Apache territory. He had traveled far and wide, asking questions, following trails, and listening to the stories of traders, travelers, and settlers. Though he had learned much about the land and its people, the one person he truly sought remained elusive. The Apache woman who had saved his life seemed to exist only in the desert's vast expanse and in his memory. Yet John never gave up hope. Every day, as he tended to his ranch and his cattle, he imagined the moment when he would see her again. It was a warm afternoon when John decided to visit a nearby trading post at the edge of Apache territory. Traders from various regions passed through, bringing supplies, news, and stories. John hoped that someone there might know something, anything, about the woman who had saved him. The post was a modest wooden structure surrounded by dry, dusty land. Children ran barefoot in the dirt, and merchants shouted over the sounds of animals and wagons. John felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness as he tied his horse outside and stepped in. Inside, the air smelled of dust, leather, and spices. Men and women moved about, exchanging goods and greetings. John asked questions carefully, describing the woman as best he could. Some shook their heads, saying they had never seen her. Others nodded thoughtfully, recalling stories of a brave Apache warrior who helped travelers in danger. John's heart raced. Each mention of her bravery made the memory of the day he was saved feel closer, almost real again. He thanked those who offered advice and continued his search among the crowd. Then, suddenly, John saw her. His heart leapt into his throat. Across the room, standing near a small counter, was the Apache woman. Time seemed to slow. She looked just as he remembered, alert, graceful, and strong. Her dark eyes scanned the room, her posture calm but confident. Even from a distance, John recognized her instantly. Without thinking, he started to move toward her, calling out with a voice filled with emotion. "Stop." "I'll pay," the words echoed through the trading post. She turned, her eyes meeting his. For a moment, neither spoke. The noise of the room seemed to fade, and all John could see was her. Recognition flashed across her face, but so did caution. She did not run, but she did not approach either. She studied him carefully, as if assessing whether his intentions were genuine. John slowed, holding his hands up to show he meant no harm. He wanted to explain, to thank her, to somehow repay her for the life she had saved, but the words felt inadequate. He approached her slowly, keeping his eyes on hers. "I don't know if you remember me," he said, his voice low and steady. "You saved my life. I wanted to thank you." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of months of reflection and gratitude. The Apache woman studied him silently. Her expression softened slightly, but she did not respond immediately. She had seen many travelers, some kind and some dangerous, and her caution was not misplaced. Finally, she spoke, not in words he could understand, but in gestures that were clear. She indicated that she remembered him and that she knew he meant well. John nodded, relieved, and reached into his bag. He pulled out a small bundle of supplies, tools, food, and coins as a token of gratitude. "I want to repay you," he said earnestly, "for saving my life. Please take this." She shook her head gently, refusing his offer. John was momentarily taken aback. He had expected her to accept, to allow him some form of repayment, but she would not. Her refusal was firm, yet kind. She gestured that acts of bravery and kindness could not be bought, that the life she had saved was not something she had done for reward. John paused, thinking carefully about her words. He realized that gratitude was more than gifts or coins. It was respect, understanding, and acknowledgement. Over the next few hours, John and the Apache woman began to speak in small ways, using gestures, simple words, and the few phrases they could share in common. He learned her name, Aeon, and she learned his. They shared stories of their lives, John of the ranch, the cattle, and the land he loved, Aeon of her people, the desert, and the traditions she cherished. Though the language barrier remained, they understood each other through patience, attention, and mutual respect. John realized that communication was more than words. It was about presence, observation, and sincerity. Aeon began to show John how her people survived and thrived in the desert. She pointed to plants that could be eaten or used as medicine, to paths that led to hidden water sources, and to rocks that provided shelter from the sun. John was amazed by her knowledge and skill. He had always thought he knew the desert, but she revealed a world he had never imagined. Every gesture, every instruction, carried lessons in observation, patience, and humility. As they spent time together, John could see why she had been able to save his life so efficiently. Her calm demeanor, quick reflexes, and knowledge of the land were remarkable. She moved through the world with a confidence he had never seen before. John began to understand that her bravery was not only a personal trait, but part of the culture and training of her people, a combination of instinct, practice, and respect for the world around her. In turn, John shared small things about his own life. He showed her how he managed his ranch, explained how he cared for his cattle, and demonstrated simple tools that made daily life easier. Aeon watched attentively, curious about his world, asking questions with gestures and expressions. Though they came from different cultures, they began to see the value in each other's knowledge. John realized that friendship could grow even between people with different ways of life if there was respect, trust, and a willingness to learn. By the end of the day, John felt a deep sense of relief and joy. He had found Aeon, and more importantly, he had reconnected with the person who had changed his life. He realized that the moment of their reunion was not just about paying a debt, but about acknowledging a bond that had already been formed in the canyon months earlier. Gratitude, he understood, could be expressed through understanding, friendship, and shared experience, not just through gifts or payment. Before parting, John made a promise in his heart. He would continue to learn from her, to respect her culture, and to honor the courage and kindness she had shown him. Aeon, in her quiet way, acknowledged this understanding. Though she still refused any material repayment, there was a subtle sense of trust between them. They had crossed the barrier of language, culture, and distance, forming a connection that was stronger than either had expected. As John left the trading post that evening, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The desert, once harsh and isolating, now seemed full of possibilities. He had learned patience, respect, and humility. He had also learned that true gratitude could not be bought, it had to be lived. He rode back to his ranch, thinking of Aeon and the lessons she had taught him. Every shadow, every rock, every sound reminded him of her presence, and he felt a quiet determination to continue honoring her bravery. That night, under the vast, star-filled sky of the desert, John reflected on everything that had happened. He realized that life was fragile and unpredictable, but also full of moments of extraordinary kindness and courage. He had been given a second chance, and he owed it to himself, to Aeon, and to the memory of that day to live fully, with respect and gratitude. In the quiet of the desert night, he whispered a silent thank you to her, knowing that she would understand even without words. The next morning, John returned to his routine at the ranch, but the encounter at the trading post stayed with him. Every task, every walk through the fields, every interaction with neighbors reminded him of the lessons Aeon had taught him. He knew that finding her again would not always be easy, but he also knew that their paths were connected. He felt a quiet hope that one day their bond would deepen, and he would have the chance to show that her courage had inspired him to become a better man. Through it all, one truth remained clear. Aeon had changed John forever. She had saved his life, yes, but she had also opened his eyes to a new way of living, one with patience, respect, and understanding. The moment of their reunion, marked by his words, "Stop, I'll pay," had become more than a plea. It was a recognition of everything she had done, and a promise of the gratitude he would carry in his heart for the rest of his life. Over the next few weeks, John Whitman spent more time with Aeon, learning not only about her life but also about the ways of her people. Each day brought new lessons and discoveries. John had always thought he understood the desert and the land he worked on, but Aeon showed him that there was far more to learn. She taught him how to read the subtle signs of nature, the tracks of animals, the direction of the wind, the patterns of the sun and the stars. He discovered that the desert, which had once seemed harsh and empty, was full of life, rhythm, and wisdom for those who knew how to observe. Aeon began by showing him the plants and herbs that grew in the region. Some were for food, some for medicine, and some had other uses, such as crafting or making tools. John listened carefully, taking mental notes as she explained which plants were safe, which ones could help heal wounds and which were poisonous. He was fascinated by the depth of her knowledge. It was not something that could be learned in a day. It was the product of generations of observation, experience, and care. He realized that her people had survived in the desert for centuries because of this understanding and respect for the land. As John learned about plants, Aeon also taught him about water sources. Water was life in the desert, and knowing where to find it could mean the difference between survival and disaster. She showed him hidden springs, small underground streams, and areas where morning dew collected. She explained how to conserve water, how to share it fairly, and how to track its flow across the land. John had always relied on wells and creeks near his ranch, but he now understood that water was a precious gift that required knowledge and respect. In addition to plants and water, Aeon shared hunting and tracking skills. She taught John how to move quietly through the desert, how to watch for footprints, and how to interpret signs left by animals. They practiced tracking rabbits, deer, and even small birds, learning to move silently, predict movement, and anticipate behavior. John was amazed at how Aeon could read the land and the creatures on it. He began to understand that survival in the desert was not about strength alone. It was about observation, patience, and understanding the natural world. Beyond practical skills, Aeon introduced John to the values and traditions of her community. She explained how her people worked together to survive, how they shared resources, and how they respected both the land and each other. John was struck by the sense of unity and purpose he saw in their actions. While he had always respected neighbors and the community around his ranch, he realized that the Apache way of life carried a deeper connection to nature and each other, a balance between independence and interdependence. John began to help Aeon's people in small ways as well. He shared knowledge about ranching, tools, and simple techniques to improve daily life. He taught them how to mend fences, dig shallow wells, and store food more efficiently. Aeon and her people were eager to learn, just as John had been eager to learn from them. Each lesson he shared strengthened the bond between him and the community. He began to feel a sense of belonging he had never experienced on his own ranch, surrounded only by cattle and distant neighbors. As the days passed, John also learned about the challenges her people faced. They had to protect themselves from harsh weather, predators, and occasional conflicts with outsiders. Aeon explained how they resolved disputes peacefully within the community and how they worked together to ensure safety and fairness. John was impressed by their wisdom and resilience. He realized that bravery was not only about facing danger in the moment, but also about living with responsibility, empathy, and foresight. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the desert sky with shades of pink and gold, John and Aeon sat together on a rocky outcrop. They had been tracking a herd of deer earlier, and now they rested, sharing water and dried fruit. John looked at the horizon, feeling a sense of peace he had never known before. "I never realized how much I didn't know," he said softly. "The desert, your people, it's amazing. I feel like I've been blind all my life." Aeon smiled slightly, her eyes reflecting the fading light. She did not speak, but her gesture of placing a hand over his spoke volumes. She had shared her world with him, and he was beginning to understand not just the skills, but the spirit and values that guided her life. John realized that learning from her was not only about survival, it was about becoming a better, more thoughtful person. Over the next several days, John continued to practice the skills Aeon had taught him. He tracked animals with more confidence, identified edible plants, and learned to conserve water efficiently. Each success brought a sense of accomplishment and deepened his respect for her knowledge. Aeon observed patiently, offering guidance when needed, but allowing John to learn through experience. He began to see that true teaching was not about giving answers, but about guiding someone to discover them for themselves. In addition to practical lessons, Aeon introduced John to the stories and traditions of her people. She shared tales of courage, resilience, and wisdom passed down through generations. John listened carefully, captivated by the richness of their culture. These stories were not only entertaining, they carried lessons about life, responsibility, and the importance of community. John realized that learning from Aeon and her people was shaping him in ways he had never expected. He was becoming more patient, more observant, and more mindful of the world around him. One day, while they were gathering herbs near a small stream, John noticed Aeon's expression change. She pointed to tracks in the sand, small and delicate, belonging to a family of deer. "They move carefully," she said, her voice calm but focused. John followed her gaze and watched the animals move through the desert. He was amazed at how much information she could gather from such small signs. Aeon explained that every creature left a story in its tracks, a trail that could teach patience, awareness, and respect for life. John felt a deep admiration for her wisdom and began to see the desert in a completely new light. As the days turned into weeks, John and Aeon grew closer. Their friendship was built on trust, shared experiences, and mutual respect. They laughed together, learned together, and faced small challenges together. John realized that the bond they had formed was more than a result of the day she had saved his life. It was a connection built through time, understanding, and shared values. He began to feel that he had found not only a teacher but a true friend, someone who had changed the way he saw the world. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat together watching the stars. The desert sky was vast and full of light, each star seeming to shine more brightly in the quiet of the night. John thought about his life before meeting Aeon, the days spent alone on the ranch, the focus on survival and work, and the lack of understanding he had had about the world around him. Now, he saw life differently. He understood that survival was only one part of living. The other part was connection, respect, learning, and growth. As the cool desert night wrapped around them, John felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had come to the desert to repay a debt, but he realized that the true reward was far greater. He had gained knowledge, wisdom, and a connection that could not be measured in coins or gifts. Aeon had taught him lessons that would stay with him forever, lessons about patience, courage, respect, and the value of understanding others. Through his time with Aeon, John also began to reflect on his own life. He thought about the way he had managed his ranch, the decisions he had made, and the people he had encountered. He realized that there was much he could do to improve not only his own life, but also the lives of those around him. Inspired by the Apache way of life, he decided to use what he had learned to help his community, to teach respect for the land, and to share knowledge in a way that could benefit others. By the time John returned to his ranch after several weeks of learning and exploration, he was no longer the same man who had set out months earlier. He was stronger, wiser, and more thoughtful. He had gained skills that could help him survive and thrive, but more importantly, he had gained understanding, compassion, and a sense of purpose. The lessons he had learned from Aeon would guide him for the rest of his life. He knew that their bond would continue to grow, that their friendship would deepen, and that the experiences they shared would shape not only his life but also the lives of others. John understood that gratitude and respect were not simple acts. They were commitments to live with integrity, to honor those who helped us, and to carry forward the lessons we receive. As he stood on the edge of his ranch, looking out over the desert, John felt a quiet sense of peace. He remembered Aeon's calm confidence, her deep knowledge, and her unwavering courage. He realized that her teachings were not just about survival. They were about living fully, thoughtfully, and respectfully. He knew that he had been given a gift more valuable than anything he could buy. The gift of understanding, friendship, and a new way of seeing the world. After weeks of learning from Aeon and spending time with her community, John Whitman finally returned to his ranch. The journey back was quiet, giving him time to reflect on everything he had experienced. The desert looked familiar, yet it felt different. The sun shone over the rocky terrain, the wind carried the scent of sage and earth, and the cattle wandered calmly through the pastures. Yet John saw it all with new eyes. He noticed the subtle changes in the land, the paths of animals, and the signs that told stories he had never paid attention to before. The desert, which once seemed harsh and lonely, now felt alive and full of lessons. John's return to the ranch was not just a physical journey, but a transformation of his mind and heart. He had learned skills that would help him survive in almost any situation: tracking, identifying plants, finding water, and reading the signs of nature. But even more importantly, he had gained wisdom, patience, and understanding. He realized that the true value of what he had learned from Aeon and her people was not just practical. It was about living thoughtfully and respectfully, caring for others, and understanding the world around him. As he walked through his ranch, John began putting his new knowledge into practice. He repaired fences with a more careful eye, making them stronger and more durable. He moved the cattle to grazing areas that he had previously overlooked, areas he now understood would provide better nutrition and safety. He adjusted his water system, conserving water more efficiently and making sure that every trough and well was used wisely. Even small changes like rotating grazing areas and leaving certain plants to grow made a difference. John realized that the land itself was a teacher, and he had learned to listen. But John also realized that his growth was not meant to be kept to himself. Inspired by Aeon and the sense of community he had witnessed, he decided to help others around him. He began sharing what he had learned about the desert, the land, and survival. Neighbors who once saw him only as a rancher began to see him as a guide and a teacher. He helped them identify edible plants, track animals, and conserve water. He explained how to observe the desert, understand its rhythms, and respect its resources. People listened carefully, recognizing that his knowledge came from experience, not just books. Though he had learned much from Aeon, John never forgot her example. He remembered her bravery, patience, and humility. He thought of the day she had saved him from the bandits in the canyon, the calm way she had guided him, and the selfless nature of her actions. That memory stayed with him, reminding him that courage and kindness were not measured by words or coins, but by actions. He understood that gratitude was expressed not only by repayment, but by living in a way that honored the lessons and sacrifices of others. John also took time to reflect on the connections he had built with Aeon's community. He realized that their way of life, their unity, and their respect for the land offered lessons for everyone, including settlers like him. He began to see that survival and success were not only about hard work, but also about relationships, understanding, and cooperation. He felt a responsibility to act as a bridge between his neighbors and the Apache community, to foster mutual respect and shared learning. Over the next months, John's ranch began to flourish. The cattle were healthier, the land was better cared for, and his neighbors benefited from his guidance. He had introduced new ways of rotating grazing, conserving water, and using the land wisely. At the same time, he maintained the traditions of his own family, balancing new knowledge with what he had learned from his ancestors. The ranch became not just a place of work, but a place of learning, respect, and community. Despite the busy life on his ranch, John never stopped thinking about Aeon. He hoped to see her again, to share what he had accomplished, and to continue learning from her wisdom. He knew that the bond they shared was rare, a connection formed through trust, gratitude, and shared experiences. He often remembered the moment at the trading post when he had shouted, "Stop, I'll pay," and the way she had gently refused. That moment had become a turning point, reminding him that life's greatest lessons were learned not through material rewards, but through understanding, respect, and shared humanity. John also made it a point to teach his children and the younger members of the community what he had learned. He told them stories about Aeon, about her courage, her skills, and the way she had helped him. But he also emphasized the lessons behind the stories, the importance of respect for nature, the value of patience, and the power of kindness. His children listened attentively, absorbing not just the story but the wisdom it contained. John realized that this was a way of passing on Aeon's lessons to future generations, ensuring that her bravery and teachings would live on. As the years passed, John's respect for Aeon and her people continued to grow. He maintained contact with them whenever possible, visiting their community, exchanging knowledge, and fostering cooperation. Over time, he became a trusted ally and friend, building bridges where there had once been distance and misunderstanding. John understood that true gratitude and respect were lifelong commitments, not fleeting gestures. He carried Aeon's influence in everything he did, letting her lessons guide his decisions, his relationships, and his approach to life. One day, as John walked through the fields at sunset, he paused to watch the sun dip below the horizon. The desert was calm, the air warm and still. He thought about his journey, from the day he had been saved to his search for Aeon, to the time he had spent learning from her, and finally to the life he now led. He realized that every challenge, every moment of fear or uncertainty had shaped him into the man he had become. And he knew that the greatest gift he had received was not just survival, but understanding, courage, and a deeper connection to the world and its people. John's legacy began to grow, not just through his ranch, but through the lessons he shared. Travelers who passed through his land often remarked on the careful way he managed the desert, the respect he showed for the land and its people, and the wisdom he offered. Settlers and neighbors sought his advice, learning to live with more awareness, compassion, and care. John had become more than a rancher. He had become a teacher, a guide, and a bridge between worlds. In quiet moments, John would think of Aeon and smile. He remembered her calm eyes, her skillful hands, and the selfless way she had saved his life. That single act had changed the course of his life in ways he could never have imagined. He knew that he could never repay her fully in material terms, but he realized that living his life with integrity, respect, and gratitude was the best way to honor her. Her influence was woven into every decision he made, every lesson he taught, and every act of kindness he extended to others. Even as he aged, John continued to walk the desert with a sense of purpose. The land had taught him lessons, Aeon had taught him lessons, and the community around him had shown him the value of connection and respect. He often shared stories with his grandchildren, telling them about the brave Apache woman who had saved his life and the lessons she had imparted. He emphasized that courage, kindness, and respect were not just traits to admire, they were ways of life to practice every day. As the story of John and Aeon spread quietly among neighbors and travelers, it became more than a tale of survival. It became a lesson in humanity. People who heard the story were inspired not only by the bravery of Aeon but by John's response, his gratitude, and the way he had applied her teachings in his own life. The desert, once a place of challenge and danger, had become a symbol of learning, growth, and connection. Years later, as John looked out over his ranch, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The cattle grazed peacefully, the land thrived, and the community around him had grown stronger and more connected. He had lived a life shaped by courage, kindness, and respect. And though he never forgot the day Aeon saved him, he knew that her greatest gift had been the wisdom, understanding, and perspective she had given him. In the end, John realized that the true measure of gratitude was not in coins, words, or gifts. It was in the way one lived, the way one treated others, and the way one honored the lessons learned from those who touched their life. Aeon's act of bravery had created ripples that affected not only John but everyone he influenced. Through him, her courage and wisdom would continue to guide others for generations. John's story, and the story of the Apache woman who had saved him, became a quiet legend of the desert. Not for the violence or danger he faced, but for the lessons in courage, trust, and human connection. And though time would pass and generations would come and go, the bond formed between a rancher and a brave Apache woman would live on in memory, respect, and the lives they had touched together.